Okay, so in this video I'm going to show you guys how to do a wireframe render of your model. So wireframe is this, where we can actually see the three-dimensional geometry. And the reason why employers like to see this is because they like to see how low poly your model is and how organized your edge flow is. And it's basically, they want to take a peek at the technical underpinnings of your model instead of just seeing a pretty picture. Because you can have pretty nasty geometry from a technical and production standpoint on a model and have it look amazing in a render. But then you see the wireframe, you're like, oh my god, that is a complete mess. I can't hire that person. So the wireframe is designed to show that you, in addition to having created a nice piece of rendered art, that you actually have technical mastery of economy of edge flow, and you have a mastery of making the model so that it's riggable, texturable, all those other things. And so very quickly what we can do is we can leave off at our last render, where I'm going to make some tweaks just to speed things up a little bit. So I'm going to come into the sampling settings, which I had at 4, and I'm going to just reduce these down to 3. I'm going to take them back down to the defaults just so that I can render this thing fast enough, because I'm going to render it at full resolution this time. For you guys, I think honestly, as slow as these machines are, I probably wouldn't go beyond, say, 5 or 6 for the sampling settings. I took it up to 6 and it took forever. So I don't know, man. If you're rendering here at school, maybe you just pin those all at 4s and I'll let you get away with it. But it was just taking way too long. So my machine at home, it's pretty fast. I could probably take that up to like 7 or 8 and have renders take about a half hour each. But these machines, I don't know, it was looking like it was going to take an hour or 2 to render a full frame. So I'm gonna take these back down to default. All right, so our render resolution that we want to use is 1920 by 1080. So I'm going to change this to be, that's considered full res. So I'm going to go to the Common tab, and there's a preset in here. So if you want to make it easy on yourself, you can just go to Image Size, and then HD 1080 is the final resolution we want to use, which is 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. And then what I want to do is I want to render one of these out with my materials and lighting as I showed you. And so I'm going to let that finish. I might pause Bandicam so you don't have to. So the other thing I wanted to do too was I'm going to go to Window here, View, and I'm going to change the resolution to full. I was having trouble yesterday seeing my render tiles, and so I think I can solve that by maximizing this. It's kind of, they're like coming and going, so it's kind of annoying. See, I can see that it's updating on render because the tiles are showing up, but the little crosshairs that I showed you guys a while back when you turn on show render tiles are kind of like coming and going on their own, which is kind of annoying because with Arnold, this little percentage thing doesn't always show, and it's not always accurate either. So this kind of tells you what it's doing, but sometimes that thing can stay pinned and it looks like it's not updating, and that's where those little render tiles come in handy, because it shows you that it's working and doing something. And I can't see them, so the only other thing you can do to see if Arnold is still working, if the percentage bar is pinned so it's not moving, and then you can't see your render tiles to show that it's updating, you can right click and open up the task manager, and then you can go to performance, and if your CPU is pinned out at 100%, then you know that Arnold is still rendering. So I really wish they would fix this in future versions of the renderer to give us a more intuitive way of knowing if the render is actually doing anything. But for the time being, this is what we have: percentage meter, render tiles, which currently aren't showing. So percentage meter, which is locked at 49. Render tiles, which aren't currently showing. So I couldn't tell if it's doing anything or if it's crashed. Or you can go to the task manager and check the CPU, and if it's pinned and it's still updating, then Arnold is probably still working. I use the term probably because I don't freaking know. I'm not getting any feedback from Maya, so we just hope it hasn't crashed. You could do this. You can go to processes and you see Maya. If Maya has crashed, it'll have in parentheses here, not responding. But it sometimes also says not responding even when it hasn't crashed. So there's just really not any good indicator for us to know if Arnold is still going. So there we go. Now I can see my render tiles. So I'm going to be like, okay, yeah, it's still rendering. I'm going to let it render. I'm rendering this at full res, which is what I want you guys to render all your final output images at. So it's going to take longer. For this video, I'm not going to make you sit through this with me. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this until it's finished. So this right here is an example of the render tiles that I was talking about, these little white hash marks. And so they've been kind of coming and going in this render, which is somewhat annoying. I had to click the 1-to-1 to get them to show up, but here if I move around the frame we can see that it's updating. So I'm the kind of person where if I'm working on the computer, I like it to be giving me feedback to let me know that it hasn't crashed, because I'm scarred from years of crashing apps and hardware, and I really always constantly don't want to waste my time, because you don't want to be sitting here looking at a render for like 2 hours and then all of a sudden find out, oh crap, the software crashed like 2 hours ago and it wasn't doing anything. That's basically the computer and the software not respecting your time, which is uncool. Alright, so my full resolution render finally finished. I put a stopwatch on it and it came out to about 15 minutes with another 5 minutes before I started the stopwatch. So I just realized something too. I'm kind of new to Arnold, so I didn't realize that this little percentage thing was not percentage of render, it's actually the percentage of your image. So that was good to realize, because I was like, I still don't think it gives you, oh there it is, that's the readout. So on the bottom left it tells you how long it took to render your frame, but it doesn't give you any active information about the frame rendering. So that frame took 20 minutes to render. So I'm just trying to give you guys a frame of reference. So when you do your final full res images, account for and budget for about 30 minutes to probably 45 minutes per frame. And that was with me at a sampling value of 4333, which is the default. So that's here on the school's computer, which is kind of slower.
Like I said, the other one downstairs.
If you have a faster one, like my machine probably would have ripped through that in a couple minutes.
That back corner in the lab, like I said, it was live. I had everything on 5s. And it was
Okay,
live.
so the back computers in the corner, you can just
walk in,
ask the tech and say, hey, where are the rendering machines?
The tech will know.
Yeah, they'll know. All right, so I got a finished frame here, and what I want to do is save this. So I'm going to say save image. When we do a full color render, it's considered a beauty render. That's just the terminology in compositing. So I'm going to call this, what do I want to call it? I'll just call it beauty render 01. Or here I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to go render beauty. I don't even know if I'm spelling beauty right. And this one is at full resolution. Then what I need to do is I need to render another version of this same file. And this one I'm going to apply a wireframe shader. So one annoying thing with this is if you want to get back to the materials, like let's say you had a bunch of materials in your scene, like glass on something, plastic on one thing, a matte surface on another thing, you would have to basically reassign those. So I'm going to show you a little trick. What I want to do is I want to make a copy of basically all my models. So I'm going to, in this scene I only have 2 models. I'm going to duplicate them and I'm going to put them in a new layer, and then I'm going to grab the old ones and I'm going to put them in a layer. And what I want to do here is I want to make separate layers for my separate materials. So we'll say that this one has my original materials, which I don't want to tamper with. And I have a new one that I'm going to use with wireframe material. So and with this new new layer of objects, I'm going to select both the objects and say assign new material. And I'm going to put on a Arnold wireframe material. And then I want to go to the attributes for that material, and I want to make sure that I have, it's updating. I think my computer is running out of RAM because I was doing lots of RAM intensive stuff today. So I'm going to go into the wireframe material, and I need to make sure, oh, wrong one. I need to go to the wireframe material, which is the AI wireframe 1 here, and I want to change the edge type to polygons. If you do triangles, it'll actually show all the triangles, which is not what we want. When we're doing a wireframe render, we want the quads, and if you set it to polygons, it'll set that to quads. The fill color is going to be everything else, and the line color is going to be the lines you see here, like the green lines and white lines. It's going to render them as black, and then we can change the line width. So I'm probably going to leave the line width at 1 pixel and just go ahead and render this out. And so what's going to happen here is I'm generating a composite, and it's already started rendering, and it looks like maybe it finished. Let's zoom in. The wireframe render is going to go a lot faster than the beauty, because the beauty render is calculating all the lighting and shadows and everything, and in the wireframe render it just has to render the wireframe. So this is what my wireframe render looks like. It's my dude with the background, also wireframe. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this image. So I'm going to say File, Save Image. And this one I'm also going to save as a JPEG, and I want to do it to the desktop. And I'm just going to name it the same, except for instead of render beauty, I'm going to call this one render wire. Save it. And now I have two 1920 by 1080 images. And now I want to go to Photoshop, and I want to composite these together. So I'm going to open up Photoshop. And this is how you're going to do it for your final wireframes. I'm only going to make you do 3, and you can pick them. I don't care. You basically want to pick your prettiest geometry that you have, that you're proud of, and do wireframe renders for it. So I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to open up those 2 images. So I have render beauty, render wire. I'm going to open them up. And then what I want to do is I want to take the render wire image. I'm going to hit Control A to select the entire canvas. Control C to make a copy of that canvas, and then I'm going to go Control V to paste it into my beauty render. And then I'm going to go to the layers here, and in the transfer functions I'm going to do multiply, and now I can see my wireframe right on top of my beauty render, and it looks all pretty. And this is kind of a nice way to represent your wire, because it still contains your materials and your artistic lighting. And it looks pretty dynamic. So in the past, this is how we used to represent wireframes. That's pretty boring. And now this is a little bit more elegant way to do it. You can also play with the transfer functions here. So if I take this to dissolve, and I just start arrowing down, so I'm using the down arrow, it'll actually cycle through every single one of these transfer functions. And you can kind of just see how they're going to look. And you might find something a little bit more interesting than multiply. I hate that one, don't do it. But feel free to play around with that, because if you can make your wireframe look visually interesting and it's different than other guys, it's just something in the job market that kind of stands you out. So they'll remember, they'll be like, oh dude, you have the coolest wireframes, how did you do that? And it's just a little conversation piece. But for my money, if you're just trying to get it done, like this is semi-interesting, could be better. You know, I could be like, oh, I like divide, but it looks a little weird. And I could come in here to the opacity and play with it and be like, oh, that's better, right? But for my money, right out of the box, I thought multiply kind of looked the best. So I'm going to go with multiply. And then I'm going to hit Control-Shift-S to save a copy of this image. And I will call this one render beauty wire, and then I will save it as a JPEG. And then now this is what you would turn into me. So this is my finished render with my lighting and my wireframe all in one. And so when I say here in a moment, when I tell you what to do for the homework, I say I want a wireframe. This is what I'm talking about. You're going to render your beauty. You're going to superimpose your wire on top of it. And I want 3 of those. You pick them. It can be 3 images from any project. So hand, room, or head. You decide. Cool? Good. All right, that was it. And now you know how to do wireframe renders.